Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hi, and welcome to the Lost Voice radio show. I'm John Studi with Jacob Nelson, and together we're going to be talking about how to apply the concepts of classical philosophy and theology to our world. Jacob, how are you doing?
I am doing well. I am tired. Muy cansado, mi amigo.
Look at that. We have a bilingual program now. This is great.
I'm really not bilingual. I know just enough to know that I'm terrible at Spanish.
Hey, that's an important skill.
How are you doing, John Studi?
Oh, I'm doing fairly well, too. Was a little bit tired a few minutes ago, but did a few burpees and got the heart rate going. Now I'm all excited for this marathon of us dialoguing with each other about all sorts of crazy
doing
things.
Philosophical jujitsu.
Philosophical jujitsu. Neither of us will end up with all of our bones intact by the end of this episode. I can promise you that.
Oh, that is fantastic. I think last week we ended with talking about justice and what justice is and all this stuff. So this week we're going to just talk briefly about that to begin. And it actually works out well, and then talking about things like technology, proper use of technology, what's due to us, what's due to the society as a whole, what is leisure, all of this good stuff. But it's kind of rooted in justice, I would say. Again, just as a basic philosophical notion, justice is to give to another what's due to them. And so, John, you're a human. I owe you respect. You look shifty-eyed when I said you're a human. Are you not?
I can neither confirm nor deny these allegations.
I don't think anybody can confirm much about you. You're pretty shifty. But justice is to give to another what's due to them, so I'm going to just at least pretend that John is human, so I owe him respect for the dignity that's implicit to him having a human nature. But there's three kinds of law. When we talk about justice, we necessarily have to talk about law. And there's three kinds of law. The first and most important being divine law. It's the law of God. It's the law that God is.
Sure, yeah.
It's whatever God posits. Then there's natural law, which is what he posits into his creation. Mm-hmm. So this would be an example of, say, marriage is between one man and one woman.
Yep.
That's natural law. It's according to our nature as humans, but it's also according to nature, just as creation is in general. Some other good pieces of natural law, things like, we shouldn't murder each other. Did you not know that?
Let's just move on.
All right, we'll move on. So, thou shalt not murder is natural law as well. And so we look at these areas of natural law, and those are in accord with but subordinate to divine law. Mm-hmm. So divine law is one, natural law is two, and then the third one would be human law or conventional law. John, you have here contingent law, human positive law. They all kind of mean the same thing.
Right.
Laws that people make. And unfortunately, in our culture, we've started to kind of, disregard, let's say, the first two.
Oh, right. I think there's a number of reasons for this in terms of the historical development of thought. But once we have decided that our laws should be wholly secular, and once we've decided that we want to reject that humans have an intelligible nature within them that we can know through reason and with certainty, then we do dispatch both with divine law and with human positive law as a part of the moral framework with which we're going to operate. And I think part of the issue too is back after the Reformation, there was a lot of discussion about what exactly God's will is and what it is to live a meaningful and moral human life. And because there was just so much disagreement, I think people fell into the idea that, well, if there's all these different opinions, then we can't actually know what God's will is for us, and therefore there probably isn't a
but
single one.
This comes from the fallacy of personal revelation, too. And I say fallacy of personal revelation, not that God doesn't speak to each one of us, but God doesn't reveal the nature of His church to each person and leave it up to their own judgment. That's ridiculous. Because then we'd have as many churches as there are people. Which is almost the case, unfortunately, after 500 years of Reformation history. I think a lot of what's happened is that people don't understand that there's more laws out there than just human law. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is just kind of natural to us in that we're body and soul, and so we need physical things in order to speak truth to us. It's why in the sacraments there are outward signs of inward grace. God could, in a sacrament just all of a sudden say, well, John, you're redeemed, period, boom, good, done. But that doesn't really speak to us as humans because we're not only spiritual, we're not only immaterial. And so God uses physical things not for His sake, but for ours. Well, that becomes very difficult when it comes to law because we get confused on the fact that there is a natural law. And Justice Clarence Thomas, when he was being confirmed to the Supreme Court back in 1994, I believe it was, he got absolutely skewered by the Senate at the time because he was a natural law apologist. And it was really interesting that I should have thought of this before, because now with Neil Gorsuch, he's also a natural law apologist. But Clarence Thomas was skewered by the Senate, and he kind of walked back his belief in natural law a little bit in order to be confirmed. And interestingly enough, it was a Democrat senator who then turned to Clarence Thomas and said, "How dare you relieve yourself of your own belief." Wow. I couldn't believe it. It's in this story is recounted in a great book, 50 Questions on Natural Law by, I think it's Charles Rice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fantastic book. But yeah, justice, it's to give to another what is due, so how does that lived out? Well, there's three kinds of law. And I think the most important point to understand here is that human law, or the laws that we make as men and women in a just and well-ordered society, hopefully, is that these laws have to either be in agreement with natural and divine law, or at the very least not offend natural and divine law. Mm-hmm. So I think St. Thomas even argues at different times that even though there might be things in the culture that are wrong or morally evil, we shouldn't necessarily legislate against all of them, because it takes away the human capacity to choose. Sure. It also might cause more disruption or damage to the common good. Right. Like if we were to inspect people for the bedroom acts, if we put cameras and recorders, I mean, that'd just be a terrible thing to do. Well, but that would actually offend natural law. Right, that's what I'm saying, privacy of marriage. But even things that maybe wouldn't offend natural law, St. Thomas argues that we shouldn't necessarily legislate against all of those things. Oh, that's what you're saying, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I gotcha. But, so our human law needs to at least not offend natural law. And, we're not going to legislate every little bit of natural law because that would be insane. Sure. So... speaking of insanity, one thing, I don't know if you've ever read the book. I always love when you start a sentence, speaking of insanity. Well, then I just show up. But Jay Budziszewski wrote a book called What We Can't Not Know. And in it, one of the things he talks about is how the truth is like a tiger, and that, as you were saying before, this physical world reveals certain things to us. Mm-hmm. And we are living in a culture right now that largely does put a very high value, if not the highest value, at least explicitly, on human positive law. What I've found to be interesting is that once people have kind of divorced themselves and forgotten about things like natural law, mm-hmm. and then you challenge them on the authority of human positive law, what they start doing is they start talking about rights that are due to them, natural rights. And then it's just really funny that this truth bubbles back up again after we've repressed it for so long. Yeah. And I've even found in my own dialogues with people who are secularists,
and people who just, they may not be secularists, but they do reject the idea of natural law for one reason or another, or they don't at least pay any mind to it. Once I start articulating to them what natural law is and how it works and how it's just a part of how the world operates, there's nothing special necessarily humans, other than the fact that with natural law and ethics we have the ability to reason and choose to either act contrary or in accordance with our nature. They find that to be a very compelling way to actually ground human positive law in a way that we can call it objectively just. Whereas if we just go by the will of the people, then everything is just socio-culturally relative.
Right, and we see this all the time, especially right now with all the debates around healthcare and everything, people demanding that they get healthcare even for free because it's their right to healthcare. Who says? From what authority gives that right?
Right.
It might be a good thing for everybody to have health care in America, and how it is done could be good or bad. But to talk about it as a natural right, you have a natural right to your health. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sure.
I can't offend your health because that would go against natural law and honoring you as a human person. But the actual there is not a natural right to health care. That's human law. And so once you take natural law out of it, where, like you said, where's the authority for these rights come from? People just demand, and then when they're challenged, well, I don't know, because the government said so. Well, if the government said so and the government changes, then doesn't it follow that the government could then change that right?
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So we have to appeal to a higher law, and that would be natural and divine law, in order to have some kind of foundation for human law.
That's where Peter Kreeft sometimes jokes about how frequently people who are homosexual activists or they stand up for minority rights, and they point to people who do appeal to objective moral truths as the enemy, the ones who are really going to be like the Nazis and put people in extermination camps and whatnot. I think it's actually the exact opposite. We people who believe in natural law, believe in objective human rights and the dignity of each person, are the ones with whom you're going to be the most safe, because we're believing in an unchanging standard by which to judge all of our actions, whereas somebody who believes that the human will, whether it be at the individual or the corporate level, is the beginning and end of all moral inquiry, they're going to be the ones whose opinion and actions change with every wind. And that's a dangerous thing. I mean, I think when you're in a relationship with somebody, one of the greatest signs of danger is somebody who is unstable and unpredictable. Because even if you have somebody who is prone to outbursts of anger and prone to being cranky or whatever it might be, at least you know, and you can expect it from certain kinds of behavior, certain situations, that that person might not be the greatest guy to hang out with today.
And yet you hang out with me all the time.
That is because I need people to harangue me from time to time. And Jake, nobody harangues me better than you. Thanks, buddy.
You're welcome. So that moves us into the good for man. What is man? Now, John, you kind of put this outline together today for our show prep. We talked about it on the phone a little bit, but I'm interested to see where you want to go with this, because we didn't talk about this point ahead of time.
Well, the reason why I put this in here is because whenever we're talking about ethics, we're going to be talking about good and evil, because the very foundation of ethics, the principle, the first principle of ethics is do the good, avoid the evil.
Right.
Right? And so then the question is, what is good for man? What is evil for man? And the only way we can really find that out, and when it comes down to it, is what is man? We have to figure out what he is so we can figure out what's good for him. It's just in the same way we can look at any other natural object, particularly living objects, that if we were to look at an oak tree and then, rip up its roots and then toss it in the water, it's going to live for a little while longer. But it doesn't just need the water the nutrients from the water and the nutrients from the sun, but it also needs the nutrients from the soil in order for it to continue to thrive. Or the same way, if we every time it grew a leaf and we chopped it off, then it wouldn't be able to perform photosynthesis in the way that it would normally which would cause harm, and it would be an evil to the tree. And so when we're talking about the good for anything whatsoever, and again, particularly with living or natural objects, we're asking about how is it fulfilling its end? How is it coming about to the truth of its own being? Analogically speaking, you can even talk about a triangle, which is not a living thing and not necessarily a natural thing. You don't see a lot of triangles occurring in the wild, but just a triangle. Think about this: like the being of a triangle. What is it? It's a three-sided closed plane figure with internal angles equaling 180 degrees, right? That's a good definition of like what a triangle is, the form.
Yeah, I'll accept that.
All right, great, good. And so if we were drawing a triangle with a ruler and a protractor and a radiograph pen, we could come up with a pretty good triangle, right?
Sure.
Yeah, and so that if it meets the end or the whatness of what a triangle is. But if we were galloping at full gallop, if you're riding full gallop on horseback...
I was going to say, who's galloping here?
Well, Michael sometimes likes to have me gallop. Michael's my son, just so you all know. And then he's on my back, and I'm galloping down the hallway for some reason, and he's trying to draw a triangle. And being 1.5 years old, not really knowing what a triangle is, he might try, and he might even accidentally get to that point where he draws something resembling a triangle, but it's not going to be a very good triangle, is it? Because it doesn't actually accord with what a triangle is.
Okay, so,
you get where I'm going with this, right?
Yes, we've gotten galloping down. You are galloping as a horse. Your 1.5-year-old is drawing a triangle for whatever reason.
And so,
where are we going with this?
It's pretty simple. So, like in the same way, so the what it isness of a triangle, the form of a triangle, is what I said earlier about it being a three-sided figure with 180 degrees. So the form that I drew originally with all those tools and instrumentations is going to be a very good triangle because it more closely approximates to what it means to be a triangle. So in the same way, my son's drawing will not likely approximate very closely to what a triangle is. So that way we can say it's a bad or an evil triangle. And when we talk about evil, we're not necessarily always talking about a moral evil, because some things do experience evils. Like if I were to lose my arm, if I didn't have an arm, that would be what you call natural evil, or if I was born without one.
Right.
Because as a human, the good for me is to have...
Well, an evil by definition is a lack.
Yeah, it's a lack. It's a privation.
So when I talk about this with kids, I always talk about, like, okay, what is a good chair? What makes a chair good? And it means that it has everything necessary in order for it to act as a chair. Right? So if you sit in it, it's not going to break, it's not going to fall over. It's a good chair because it's stable, it's sturdy, you can sit in it.
Right.
So an evil chair... An evil chair, not a morally evil chair, because that would be crazy. Although,
terrifying.
I don't know. Maybe we could make one.
Kind of like the one from Pee-wee's Playhouse?
I never watched Pee-wee's Playhouse.
That's probably better.
It scared me.
Yes. The chair was alive.
Did you watch Pee-wee's Playhouse?
My sister did, and I saw some episodes, and I didn't feel right watching it. There was something just not quite...
Well, the fact that you saw some of it explains a lot about yourself.
It does. I've been psychologically damaged.
Anyway, the evil chair, evil in terms of, ontology, let's say, not morally, but ontology, what the thing is if it's missing a leg, if it's going to fall over, it's going to break when you sit in it. And so it's lacking what it needs in order to be what it is. So it no longer really is a chair. That's why when... a person dies or a bird dies or whatever, what you see is not a person or a bird, it's the corpse, but it's lacking what it needs to actually be that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a big thing too, is because sometimes people object to natural law theory or this idea of real essentialism, that there's real natures in things, by asking, is it evil for a rock not to see? Because it's only lacking in the rock, right? I'm like, well... Are you stupid? Rocks aren't supposed to see. I mean, that's not a part of what it means to be a rock. And so a rock that doesn't see is just being a rock as it is. Just like a human not flying isn't something that's contrary to human nature.
Right.
It's just a human being what it is because we don't do those things.
So can I give, based on our show last week, can I give my computer human rights?
You cannot give your computer human rights. Why? Because it's not a human. It never will be. But the difference in between between moral evil and a natural evil like that is sure, a tree can grow crooked and not produce good leaves or whatever that will be contrary to the ends of the organism to continue to survive and reproduce or whatever. And we can call that a natural evil. But the reason why we don't call that tree moral evil is why?
Well, a tree can't reason against a moral law.
Right, exactly.
Thus, it cannot act with privation towards good.
Right. And so that's what it means for us to have a moral evil then.
Right.
Is that we have a unique place in the order of the cosmos, I think, as humans, in terms of material objects, where we are the only living things, like animals and trees and all that kind of stuff, that can choose to act contrary to our nature, whereas everything else acts according to its nature, and if it fails somehow, it's due to some sort of accident that's happened to them, whether that be a genetic level or at the level of their environment.
So you're telling me that if my pet dog disobeys me, it didn't commit some sin against me.
Sure.
It's disobedient, but not on a moral level, because it doesn't actually have a moral compass by which to reason or not reason.
Yes.
Right.
In fact, I think even when you're teaching it commands, insofar as it's a human activity reaching down to the level of a dog, you're giving it something that's maybe a little bit beyond its nature.
Yeah.
In terms of saying, "I am master, hear me, do my bidding." They of course will follow an alpha in their pack or what have you.
Right.
But again, these animals are largely acting on instinct. They have some understanding of or some ability to think. But they're not appealing to this divine law and reflecting on their own nature and saying it is good for me to follow master's commands, but I'm going to choose against that this time because I am valuing this other thing, my food or the bacon that fell on the floor, more so than my master's orders. And so when an animal makes a decision like that, it's not one that's reasoned out, but rather what they're doing is they're choosing based on the thing that's shiniest to them, the thing that attracts their senses most fully.
So,
which we do too.
I've known a lot of people just go after the shiniest thing at any given moment. I work with teenagers after all. But if we kind of take a step back, we can look at the four causes from Aristotle, because I think we pretty much touched them all in that brief conversation, but I think it's important to just kind of lay them out really simply and briefly so that people can kind of sink their teeth into them.
Right.
And so the four causes, and cause not in terms of cause and effect, but the four causes, I'm not really sure how to better define cause here. It's not it's like kick a ball and the ball flies.
When I first learned about this, Justin actually, a friend of ours, he defined it to me as the four questions of why anything is the way it is.
Sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate it that way too. And I think that the reason why it's good for us to understand and address the four causes, because in Aristotle's physics, he says that if you're going to ever know something, and he also says this in metaphysics, then you need to know the causes for its existence.
So those would be material, formal, efficient, and final.
Yes.
So material, what it's made of.
Yeah.
Let's take the classic example of a carpenter and a table. So the table is the thing we're speaking of.
Yeah.
What is the material of the table?
Wood.
Great.
Tree stuff.
That's easy. What is the formal cause of the table?
Tableness.
Tableness. Can you better describe that?
Picnic tableness.
Can you at all better elaborate
on that? Well, this is one of the tricky things here. When you start talking about formal causes, it's almost impossible to go much deeper than giving it a quiddity or a whatness without starting to venture into the question of final causes. And so when we talk about what tableness is you speak of it as a piece of furniture which is for the sake of placing things on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be an adequate definition of a table, and with that, it does start encroaching into that question of of final causes.
But the formal cause also kind of distinguishes the wood material being in one form versus another. So we look at the table that the carpenter made uses wood material in order to be fashioned into this thing to set things on.
Sure.
But that's somehow different than the chair that the same carpenter makes. Even though it uses the same material, we recognize forms all the time, and we even assign the word to it, like, that's a table. But we're not necessarily calling it a table, I don't know, just because the wood is arranged just because it's made of wood.
Right.
But it's arranged in such a way that is similar to the table that's made out of metal, the one made out of glass, whatever else. We see the form, even if we can't quite get to the essence of what it is.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I agree with you there too. And I think that's another way of looking at formal causality too. Is formal causality in the physics. Aristotle talks about it being what it is of the thing. But when he says that, he says also that what we call it and what we understand it to be correlates to its form, correlates to its what it isness. And so in that way we can say that, number one, that the form exists both in the mind of the knower and in the thing itself.
Right.
But one way that I really like to think about form is that it's the unifying principle of the various parts of the matter. And so when we look at a wooden chair or wooden table, we see the same kind of matter, and maybe even sometimes it has the same shape, like a small stool could look like could look like a table.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have a very similar appearance and structure, but because they're the intention of the carpenter and the form of the table for what it actually will perform in terms of its active unity within the parts is going to make it those two different things. And so when I talk about formal causes, it's that that aspect of the substance we're speaking about that unifies it towards a particular end and gives it certain powers. For instance, if we had a little stool, it couldn't support things with the same power as a table could.
So like when you ordered pizza as a kid, and there was that little white thing in the middle of the pizza, I never knew what it was for. I know now it's to keep the pizza box from crushing the pizza. But I always tried to use it as a little table for my pizza. Did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think everybody did.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway. Absolutely. I mean, I was sometimes make Lego guys too, and that's an interesting thing too with natural law is that we can use our different faculties in a way that's other than its natural end, so long as we don't frustrate or damage or act contrary to the natural end. For instance, we can use our lips to kiss our wives, or whatever, and then like your mouth to kiss your wife, and that's a good thing, and that can be great. But the primary natural end of your mouth is to consume food, or you can use or to speak too. That's fine since we're social. Maybe an easier one: earrings to hear and everything, catch sound. But it's okay for you to put an earring in your ear for ornamentation. To be ornamentation. Ornamentation. There we go. For ornamentation.
Let's maybe go an easier route than organs.
Sure. Go ahead.
Like a chair is meant to sit on.
Sure.
But that doesn't preclude us from standing on it in order to reach greater heights in the kitchen.
Right. Or putting a book on it or something.
Yeah. It's not its natural end. It can be used for that. It doesn't totally frustrate the chair.
But if we start using a rock as a fulcrum and put it underneath your car and start jacking up your big van out there, we're going to start very quickly acting against the natural of the chair, won't we?
Right. Yeah, it's not for cars to sit on.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No.
But then we have the efficient cause, which is, in this case, the carpenter. The one who fashions the material into the form. Pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. And gives it existence too, because whenever you have the relationship between form and matter is that of act and potency, and so the form is always an act in relationship to the matter, which is in potency to receive a particular kind of form. And so again, we go back to the question of the wood. Well, the wood, you have 10 planks of wood or whatever. The carpenter can impart either the form of the chair or the table to that matter, but whichever form he imparts actualizes a particular kind of existence, a particular mode of existence.
Right, so those 10 planks of wood aren't going to fashion themselves into a chair.
Yeah, absolutely not.
They can potentially be a chair, a table, a spear in which to throw at you, but it's not going to do it on its own.
No, absolutely not.
So it's in potential to be all kinds of things.
Sure.
And then the efficient cause, the carpenter in this case, acts upon it.
Yep.
And moves it into that form.
Yeah, and imparts the form from his mind through his actions, and until it gets to the final form of whatever it is he's making.
Right. Speaking of final, the final cause. So the final cause is what the thing is for,
and that towards which it acts. And so we can think of, we talked about the chair a million times. It's here to sit on. A car, a vehicle is supposed to drive you around more quickly than you can, run or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to certain things, not all things have one particular end. For instance, we were talking a little bit earlier about the purposes of our mouth. Like, what is our mouth for?
Yeah.
It can be for speech. It can be for food. It can be for whistling and making other forms of and having other forms of communication besides speech. And so it can have multiple ends. Although I think most of the time things have a principal end towards which they tend. And also you can think about how within final causality, it's that for the sake of which things act. And so it can be even water. If you heat water up to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, it boils, and then it becomes steam.
Right.
So it moves towards that end. But on the other end of it, if you cool it down, then it becomes liquid water again. If you cool it down past 32 degrees Fahrenheit, then it starts becoming solid water, ice. And so it's the powers within the thing, the different potentials which could be actualized, are also what we refer to as the final cause.
Right.
In natural objects.
And there's generally, then speaking, a hierarchy of goods towards which those things can act. So a chair's final cause is to be sat upon. It can be used for other things. For instance, standing upon it.
Sure. That's
less good for the final cause of the chair, but it's still a good towards which it can act.
Yep.
So there's, even within the realm of a number of goods, it can act towards any number of them and still remain within its nature as chair.
Mm-hmm.
So then that kind of moves us into kind of what the point of this program is now, halfway through, which is great. We love getting philosophy of all sorts, but really, what is the end of man and technology and leisure and recreation and all of this good stuff? And what would philosophy have to say about it? So if we have the four causes kind of together, what do we do from here? I mean, we have computers, we have phones that have more computing power than what put the man on the moon. I mean, what do we do with all of this stuff? I mean, the church has great wisdom, which we'll talk about
2 weeks
in 2 weeks, Inter Mirifica. But at a very basic level, just looking at our own existence day to day, what do we do with all the technology? I mean, kids have addictions to phones. I mean, it's even in our high school catechesis class this past Wednesday, my wife made a point that we do a little break halfway through. It's like an hour and a half long class, so we take a little break. At the moment of the break, everybody took their phones out. And it was dead silent in the room, other than the 5 adults who sat there and talked to each other. because they actually knew how to have a conversation and a relationship. But all of the kids, it was crazy. Every single one of them had their phone out. It was dead silent. And my wife, she made the point that they were instantly on their phones because the only way they can communicate with people is through their phone.
Sure.
And she said, well, they're probably talking to all kinds of their friends, from school or not here, whatever. But the reality is, half of them were probably talking to each other from across the room, but only through their phone.
That's funny.
Which is probably true for half of them. And so what do we do as humans? I mean, technology is not inherently evil. Mm-hmm. But if we go through the four causes, what's the proper end of technology? What's the proper end of man?
Yeah, I think starting with those two questions would be helpful. Number one, I want to make two little anecdotes here. I had a retreat at the beginning of March, and there were 14, 15 kids came for dinner. This is for the hunger retreat.
Oh, right.
And there was 14 or 15 kids, and they came for dinner at the beginning of the retreat, and they were absolutely silent. They didn't talk to each other. Because I told them that they couldn't have any phones.
Yeah.
That there was going to be no social media or technology there whatsoever. And it was the most painful thing I've been through my entire life. I swear, sitting there with 14, 15 kids just dead
silent.
And I didn't understand it, and I was even trying to get them to stop talking and everything too. But even I, as somebody who believes that we really need to moderate our technology use, do fall into improper use, or at least improper proportionality of use of technology, which was indicated to me by my son's behavior. I have noticed that he's absolutely, positively obsessed with phones. Even my stinky little flip phone that I have, he loves just to hold on to it and have it with him always. And if I take it away from him, he gets really, really upset. And that's made me think about what the kind of the ways that I use technology in front of my son.
Right.
But in order to understand technology and the good that it has for man and how we can use it, understanding man, I think, is important. We've talked about this in a couple times on the show. I mean, you can define man as rational animal.
Right.
That's what we are. We're animals, therefore we have matter. We're made out of man stuff. Whatever man stuff is, that's what we are. Mm-hmm. The form is, again, we're animals, so we have all these different powers of sensation, locomotion, reproduction, communication, that kind of stuff, and then we have the rationality, which is our ability to understand universals and operate according to universal principles. As well,
the thing to deliberate.
Yeah, the thing to deliberate, to make it more simple. Yeah, to do all those kind of things, and so that's really what our ultimate end is for. And since, like you're saying before, that even within something which has multiple ends, which we do have multiple ends, there's a hierarchy of causes, or hierarchy of ends, and the highest end for man is going to be our whatever is
beatific vision.
Yeah, beatific vision,
knowledge, the capacity for true happiness, not happiness of this world, but authentic happiness or beatitude, however you want to put it. It all kind of means the same thing.
Right.
But seeing God face to face as He is.
Yeah.
That's our final end towards which all of our actions should be oriented. Mm-hmm. So that being said, even other ends that we may have, such as nourishment, eating, which you're doing right now, since you haven't had lunch yet today, that should be oriented towards the beatific vision of God, seeing God as He is. Oh, how is eating a delicious club brand original cracker oriented towards the eternal praise of God? Well, you're providing for your body what is good. You're actually acting out your nature in a way that's appropriate for your nature. In other words, you're fulfilling a portion of you that God made you to be. He made us in such a way that we have to eat. Therefore, to starve yourself would actually be to frustrate your end as a human. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't fast. That's a whole other thing. Maybe we can do I don't know.
Right. Well, there's a difference between starving and fasting. Yeah.
Right. Well, maybe one day we can do like a spiritual philosophy, theology kind of. I think that'd be good.
That'd be kind of fun.
But starving yourself for the sake of, the detriment of who you are, right, that's not good.
Well, the whole reason why I wanted to eat when I came in here right away is because I hadn't had lunch, and I've got this to do, and I've got something right after our program here that I really got to run to. And if I have low blood sugar, if I have...
You're going to be a crab cake.
I'm going to be a crab cake, and I won't be better until I have my Snickers and a nap, okay? Crab cakes would be delicious, so thanks.
That's true.
For that one.
It is Friday in Lent, so...
Ooh, we could have a crab cake.
Yeah.
Red Lobster afterwards, heck yes. But if I wasn't taking care of my body, and my body is essential for me to do the work of ministry of working through this program, or I have something related to my capacity to take care of my family after this that I need to be attentive to, and my thinking is dependent upon my body's ability to recall memories, to articulate myself, to respond with clarity, then if I'm acting against that, then I'm acting against my family, I'm acting against the ends that God's causing me to do, because I can't actually use my mind in the way it ought to be used.
Well, and there's an intimate relationship between body and soul. Mm-hmm. And I think we're living in, we talk about the postmodern culture, we talk about being in a post-Christian culture, but I think in a lot of ways we're in a neo-Gnostic culture, because there's such it's a weird neo-Gnosticism, because people deny the existence of the soul altogether, or they deny the existence of anything spiritual altogether, and they simply worship the body, which is kind of inverse from the early Gnostics, who admitted that there's both body and soul, but that the body is the evil prison of the soul.
But they do that too. I mean, sometimes people say, I'm trapped in my body. It's like, wait, hold on. If you're just your body, then who is you that's trapped? This doesn't make any sense here.
Right. Yeah, so it's really crazy. But there's an intimate connection between body and soul, because if there is no body, we are not human. If there is no soul,
then our bodies are just...
Then what's the point of the body? Because soul, from the Latin, is anima. It's that which animates. If there's just a body, well, you're just a corpse. You're not a human. You're just a lump of cells. Mm-hmm. And so we need the intimate harmony of body and soul. It's what's known as a duality, which is when there's two things that are in harmony towards one end. That's opposed to a dualism, which is two things in opposition to one another. Mm-hmm. In our culture, this weird neo-Gnostic, Albigensian, Manichaean culture we're in, if you don't know what those are, look them up. The Albigensians were crazy.
All these people were crazy.
That's true. So was the Manichaees. So were the Manichaees.
And so are the manatees.
The manatees aren't people.
That's true. So therefore they're irrational.
Right.
Or non-rational, really.
Right.
Just teasing. Go on. So.
But there's this intimate harmony between body and soul, and so what we do for the body is going to necessarily affect the soul, and what we do for the soul will affect the body.
Right.
We can't get away from that.
So what you're saying, and I completely agree with you, and I love the way you've articulated it too, is that all of our actions, whether they be from the way we use our bodies for food, for reproduction, for exercise, all those things should ultimately be oriented towards a higher end than any of those things. And that higher end is coming to practice the contemplation of God, which is what we're made for ultimately.
Right. I remember in my first round of graduate studies with Ave Maria University, we had come across this article from St. Thomas Aquinas, and in it he talked about how study is actually studiousness, and that's not to be like you studi, but studiousness, the ability to study, is a virtue under the umbrella of temperance. And this is mind-blowing to me, because if you've ever studied, whoever you are listening, if you've ever studied something and you're just struggling to get through the book or to write the paper or whatever you're doing, you feel like it's an exercise in fortitude. You have to keep fighting and fighting and fighting, having courage to study whatever it is you're studying. But Aquinas argues it's temperance. And the reason is that because we're rational, because we have a brain, because we have a mind, we can think, we can reason, we can do all this stuff, we are constantly learning. we're constantly studying.
Mm.
I mean, every time we walk into a new place, we're looking for the nearest exit. We're looking for the people to talk to or the people to avoid. We're kind of getting the lay of the land. We're studying different things on the walls, whatever. We're constantly studying our surroundings. And so the question is not about having the courage or fortitude to study, but rather where should we limit what we study. And I dare say most of our study in any given day is an exercise in futility, because we study all kinds of crap. I mean, I love Jim Gaffigan. I'm trying to remember which comedy special it was, but he talks about how we all have our McDonald's. Even if you don't go to McDonald's, we all have that thing that we're embarrassed about that we consume. And he says, if you're talking about like People Magazine, that's your McDonald's. If you're, obsessed with some other publication, or you're obsessed with some celebrity, like there's your McDonald's. And he makes a great joke of, we're obsessed with the royal family in England. And he's like, that's not even our McDonald's. That's not even our people. That's Burger King. So that was great.
That is a pun.
But yeah, his puns are fantastic. But he's got a great point that we just consume garbage all the time, not just in terms of like McDonald's, and I'm sorry if there's like some McDonald's lawyer who's listening to this. I don't mean to denigrate your product. It's all fine. But we can't expect to get the highest performance out of our body if we're not eating the highest quality of food. Mm-hmm. Likewise, we can't expect to get the highest quality out of our minds and our souls if we're not putting the highest quality fuel into it.
Right. And that's where, I think I want to skip over some of the discussion of what is the form of material and efficient cause of genus and species of technology here. Technology, I think we can pretty quickly just kind of define as something that's contrived by human art and something we make.
Right.
And it is somehow for the sake of extending our own powers. Go back to the very earliest thing. You had a man had to eat. He wanted to catch the gazelle. Couldn't catch the gazelle because it's too fast, so he invents spear to throw it and to kill the gazelle. So he's made a new technology here.
Right.
And that's, led into the horses and to horse and carriage, I should say, not horses. We didn't invent horses. Into complex mechanical things, all the way down to our day. When we speak of technology, we're usually thinking of things like smartphones and electronic gadgets.
Right, but anything we create is technology.
Yeah, anything we create, especially on Aristotelian. Actually, I think just in general verbiage, it's for the sake of it's a technology. We can call it that. It's anything that is we make for ourselves. Somehow.
Right.
Anyway. And so when it comes to technology, it ought to be aiding human life somehow, or at least not acting contrary to it. And so when we use technology, then just like everything else that we do, we should be using it in a way that helps us orient our lives for the sake of our highest good. And so this is where I get really concerned with things like especially electronics and entertainment media.
Yeah.
It has, my son, for instance, he likes watching music videos on my smartphone, and we've really had to cut back on that quite a bit because he gets very, very obsessed with one or two music videos, and he constantly asks for it, and so we have to remove it from him. It's like crack cocaine for this kid. He's trying to get it all the time, getting a new fix, and he could watch it for hours.
As a quick side note, there's a study done that every ding or vibration from a text message actually releases a tiny, tiny bit of dopamine in your brain.
Wow.
And so that's actually in part why people are so addicted to their phones and why they keep checking. I never felt my phone vibrate, I never heard it ring, but I'm going to check it to see if there's a message. Because I'm looking for that little tiny drip of dopamine that my brain releases every time there's something that comes up on the phone that's oriented towards me. Mm-hmm. And so we actually start to dopamine is one of the feel good chemicals that our brain releases, and so we get addicted to that steady little drip, and so we keep checking back. We need the fix.
Right.
It was a really fascinating study.
Yeah, I think I read something similar to that, and about how kind of the blue light of like LCD screens and everything has an effect on our brain. It's actually there's a connection between smartphone usage before bed and poor sleep and weight gain.
Yeah, well,
enough.
It's a nice thing on iPhones, at least, you can turn into night mode. So it turns the blue light off and it turns it kind of a yellow screen.
So a little more natural light.
Yeah, more natural light. But that's a little bit different than the reality of, like, our brain actually releasing addictive chemicals into our brain every time the phone rings or a text message comes in. So technology as that art that humans create something in order to extend our powers, whether it's something like flight for the power of travel or cars or forklifts, these things. Technology aids man in his powers towards his proper end. And so, like, John, you were talking about things like computers and television, video games. We have virtual reality now. We have augmented reality now. These things are not evil in and of themselves, but if we're using them to some end that's not proper to us as man, what are we doing?
Or at least out of proportionality. I mean, I think that all art imitates nature to some extent. And insofar as
true art imitates nature necessarily.
Yeah. And so when we have something, like we'd be very pleased with somebody who was able to very well draw a picture of Jake, and we appreciate that. We see a certain kind of beauty within that picture of Jake.
Absolutely,
it corresponds to the chiseled, I'm assuming chiseled jaw underneath that bushy beard of yours. But when it comes to the use of any technology, there's a certain goodness to it insofar as it brings about our particular end and helps us move towards that. And when it comes to things like entertainment media, whether it be video games, movies, TV, or this augmented reality thing we've got going on nowadays, I think part of the good for that for us is beyond, there's just aesthetic appeal to cutscenes and whatnot, or the graphics within videos. Or the stories told within movies. But the good for it is for the sake of recreation.
Right.
And when we talk about recreation, we can just look at the word itself, recreation. Saint Vincent de Paul talked about recreation as sort of like, if you were an archer, you wouldn't go around with your bow strung all the time, because if you had it strung all the time, you would wear out the actual bow, and then you'd wear out the string, and so when you needed it, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, we as humans, it's not good for us to be constantly working and constantly doing things. We need those times where we can let our mind relax and let go and unwind. We need to unstring our bow. But it's not just for the sake of itself, this recreation, but it's for the sake of making it so that we can go about living our human activities in a more fulsome way, in a way that brings about a greater capacity to enter into contemplation and prayer, and in thinking about the higher things and loving our neighbor, because those are the things that we're principally made for. And we should practice those things, and it comes back to what you're talking about, temperance and study.
Yeah, and I think, there's a couple shows I like watching on Netflix, and obviously if we sit on Netflix and binge watch, that's not a good thing. Guilty. But one of the shows really kind of within it gets a lot of times to the crux of human depravity, but it doesn't glorify the depravity. It shows actually the natural consequence of living a depraved life. And it actually shows redemptive qualities about the main character. And so I watched that in part because of the drama, the cinematography, the writing, all the stuff is fantastic in it. But it also helps me in some ways understand the deeper reality of the human condition. Because I live in a pretty Catholic circle. And so, like John, you and I hang out. Neither one of us are all that depraved. I mean, one of us may be a little more than the other, but that's a discussion for another time. Our wives are saints.
They must be.
They want to be married to them, absolutely. Yeah, to deal with us.
They've already gone through purgatory.
We are their purgatory.
Excellent.
Love you, honey. But all of our friends are really good, wonderful Catholics. And so sometimes it's easy to kind of get stuck in that, stuck in a world that doesn't really reflect the total picture of
because of echo chambers, you hear yourself more than others in a way.
Right, and so sometimes watching shows, and this shouldn't be an excuse to watch just awful shows. We shouldn't be witnessing things that are on TV today, quite frankly, a lot of things that are on TV. But in some ways, to understand the depth of the human condition better, to help form my mind to some degree there, but also as a chance to just relax and, like you said, have the string of my bow not be tense, not be taut, so that when I do go out, I'm refreshed, I'm renewed, I'm recreated for the sake of my proper end, which is to get to heaven, but by the tools that God has given me, which is things like teaching, and interacting with the culture, with youth, with young adults, with entering into their lives and bringing the gospel truth to them. If I'm only surrounded by perfect Catholics like I am, it's going to make it harder because I'm not going to fully understand what other people might be going through. And so, like, TV and computers and video games and all that can aid in that if we use those tools and those technologies proportionately, like you said, but also with a grain of salt, knowing that those things in themselves are not good nor evil. I mean, TV and computers are not good nor evil in themselves, but it's how we use them. And so if I'm going to sit down and play a video game for 10 hours, that's a bad use of a video game. But, you know, if you come over and we play a little video game for 15, 20 minutes, whatever, just to kind of shut our brains off for a minute, and then we can launch into some great deep discussion, and okay, great.
And I think it's easy for us to pick on people who play video games all day, or struggle with addiction with TV shows or music or computer, especially being on like social media and getting sucked into that. But what I've been realizing about myself recently is that I have the opposite problem, that I have so many projects going on that I am constantly working. And just in the same way, if you spend most of your time playing video games and doing all that kind of stuff, and you're learning and you're putting into your mind something that's not conducive towards your ultimate end. But on the other side, so you're not being just to yourself in that way, but I'm also not being just to myself by constantly working and doing things.
Right, and I think that just goes to the very nature of virtue in general, where virtue is a means. Virtue is, for every one virtue, there's two vices. One of excess, one of deficiency, and then the virtue is the means. Or it lies in the mean, I should say. It's not a means. Well, I guess it is too. But virtue lies in the mean. And so the really question of the moral life and recreation and leisure and everything else is a question of balance. I need to work. Work is proper to being man. I mean, God himself said, subdue the earth. And recreation is proper to man. And these, on the seventh day God rested, and so we ought to keep holy the Sabbath. But it's a question of balance. We can't go overboard on either way, because then we're not going to be doing justice to ourselves, to those around us, to God himself, all of these things.
Right. Well, even that concept of rest in sacred scripture, it's not. I think that there is an element of leisure to that rest, because we definitely should take some time off on Sundays, or Saturdays if you're going by the Old Testament, Old Covenant. But when it talks about God resting, it's not like he took a break from his work altogether, but rather what it was more like an artist stepping back and looking at the beauty that he just created. So he's reposing and contemplating on his creation. And with that in mind, when it comes to our own rest and our own Sabbath rest, especially, it should be more than just us having a day off. But it should be oriented towards a job well done. How would we live virtuously? How can we continue to be with the highest goods, which are going to be God and our families, and spend time with them and recreate, not just through our own isolation. Of course, we need some alone time, but also recreate with those around us who are who remind us of God's active work in our life, so that we can come to know Him better.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, it really comes down to, like we've both been talking about, balance. How do we then go forth and go about the work that God has called us to do as humans, and to glorify Him, to build a just society, to help draw people towards the gospel truth. We'll continue this conversation next week. We're already out of time. So next week, maybe we can get in more to how technologies can actually help us live a balanced life. How can we put this art of the human mind, of technology, to use so that we might live a well-balanced, ordered life with both recreation and work, for the sake of the glorification of God. This is Jacob Nelson along with John Studi signing off for the Lost Voice program, and we look forward to speaking with you next week. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.